we'll just give everyone a minute to jump in whilst we're getting set up. I think the Facebook should be good to go. All right, we're live on Facebook. We will go live on Instagram and TikTok. Perfect. Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Back for a live session Sunday afternoon. It's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a good one today. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to join the session. But today I really wanted to address and talk about the updates to our autism kit, changes. What does that mean? What does it mean if you've been using the kit? Why have we changed it? And also kind of what are we looking to do on a broader spectrum in that ADHD and autism space as well. So yeah, today's session is really going to be focused on ADHD and autism. We speak about it all the time. There's probably not a single live session we do where it doesn't come up as a topic. It's our best-selling bundle since we launched it a couple of months ago. That's why we talk about it. There's lots of people struggling with it. There's lots of parents struggling with it. So today, yeah, we're going to do a dedicated session because we released an email earlier this week explaining the changes to the kit. So I know this doesn't, address everyone who will have used it and everyone who's looking to use it, but I really just want to get the information out there and yeah, let as many of you know as possible because I know it's a bit of a helpless situation where all you get given is antipsychotics, antidepressants, and it's not helping, it's not making the situation any better. So we want to do as much as we can. Oops, sorry, um, camera's gone. 1 second. Okay, we're back. Okay. If you just help me out, please, Jade. So 1 second, guys. The laptop setup fell. Okay. I'll just let Jade sort that out whilst we continue. So yeah, it's just I think this needs to come forward a bit, and then tilt this forward. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, guys. Always a new location, so there's always different technical difficulties. But yeah, today I really want to address the changes to the autism kit. Also talk about, what is real autism, what isn't real autism, because that's such a confusing question that I've spent so many days researching myself. So I want to try and simplify that and get that knowledge out to you. So it's going to be a slightly different format today in terms of how we go through. So a slight deviation because I think this is really important. So yeah, let's get into it without any further ado. We've got Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and hopefully YouTube up and running. Hopefully no camera issues, and yeah, it'll be a good one. And yeah, guys, I'd encourage you ask questions. Definitely ask questions if you're not sure, if you've been going in a direction, if you've been going in circles, if you've done all the tests and you're not sure what to do next, if you've a lot of people I speak to have been on this journey for years, sometimes even decades. So, I can't guarantee you I'll have the answers. I'm always looking to learn and research. So, I'll just encourage you to ask the questions here. We've got a great community where other people who are going through the same issues as well can also contribute and help and answer your questions even better than I can sometimes. So, guys, do ask questions as we are, particularly when we're talking about ADHD and autism. Okay, so yeah, the changes. Why did we change the ADHD and autism kit? So yeah, I mean, in terms of when we launched the kit, it was actually designed for everyone really, but mostly adults. It was designed, sound is very low. Maybe join and rejoin. Jade, I don't know if you can test if the sound is very low on Instagram. For anyone else, is the sound very low on Instagram for anyone else? But yeah, let me know. Um, so yeah, in terms of the changes to the kit, what we've done is we've removed the Shilajit from the ADHD kit, and we've changed the Lion's Mane from the Lion's Mane Deluxe, which was a jewel extract, to a hot water extract. Now, why have we done that? So fundamentally, when we first launched the kit, it was designed for adults predominantly. Yes, children could use the kit, but it was mostly designed for adults. As it happened, we launched the kit and we saw literally overnight it became okay, thank you for clarifying the sound. Literally overnight, it became the most popular kit on the website. Outsold previous bestsellers that had been bestsellers for years. And we noticed it was mostly parents buying it for their autistic children. And I guess that's a clear area of struggle for people, so makes perfect sense. But it made us think, well, is this kit optimized for children? And that's a key word, optimized for children. And ultimately, the answer is for some children, but not all children. So, um, of course, when we're dealing with children, we have to be more delicate, we have to be more sensitive. And ultimately, when I mean, all herbs, all medications will have some side effects for some people, some children, depending on, what your neurological makeup is, depending on what your gut dysbiosis situation might be, depending on what nutrition or deficiencies you might have. So there's always going to be risk. But essentially, what we found was we could optimize it better for children. So rather than changing the original kit almost, which is optimized for adults, we thought we'll launch a juvenile kit, which specifically is for children. It's a safer kit, I'll say that, or it's a less aggressive protocol in terms of how we look to go after the heavy metals, how we look to rebuild the neurological structure. But I think it's a necessary change, because when we are dealing with children, it is easy to want to do the same things we do for adults. It is easy to want to speed up the results and do things as quickly as possible. But actually, when dealing with children, sometimes slow is better. Sometimes patience is key, and there's an important reason for that. And it's because children are inherently more sensitive, inherently, especially children who require the medication are more likely to be sensitive. So if you have a gut dysbiosis, so you don't have all the bacteria to break things down. If you have methylation issues, so you can't convert certain nutrients. If you don't have your detox pathways open like a normal child, then that will that can change how the absorption of certain nutrients and certain supplements can work. And in the case of Shilajit, for example, if someone is glutamate dominant, highly neurosensitive, and has a gut dysbiosis issue, then what can happen in that sense, the child gets overstimulated by Shilajit. The child could even get overstimulated by spirulina. So it's very important that it's not to say that all children will be it's not to say all need to prove. Oh, okay. Reading the comments. It's not to say all children who use these herbs will experience these issues. That's not the case at all. So for anyone who's bought the kit, been using the kit, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is suddenly gonna cause. I'm not saying this is going to cause problems for any child who has taken Shilajit or spirulina. Essentially, what I'm saying is sometimes detoxing can be too fast for a compromised system. So that then puts the onus on the parent to have to closely monitor um, the child's reaction. And then that requires, I suppose, you to have a level of medical understanding that I don't necessarily want to put that burden on you. Of course, there's do your own research. There's obviously monitoring when you're introducing any new supplement. But I think where I took the decision to remove Shilajit from the protocol specifically for children is the risk around chronic issues that are harder to notice. So, if it's a darkening of the urine, if it's looser stools, darker stools, then that could indicate a kidney issue, which, in normal terms, you'd stop taking whatever the supplement is and it would correct itself, no problem in most cases. But if that was to continue and you're continuing to do larger doses than necessarily what you should, because there are eyeball dosages as well, it's not like you have a micro dose scale. If you're doing it every day and not cycling, maybe you miss the guidance, then that can result in longer term kidney issues, which should still be reversible. But that's not a road we want to have to tackle, and it's not a road we need to tackle, because we can do it other ways. So hopefully that explains why the Shilajit has been removed. As I say, if you have been using Shilajit at the recommended dosages, you should be absolutely fine. There's just a few things I would say monitor, and that would, yeah, be, is urine getting darker? Is urine smelling different? Is stool darker? Is it smelling different? Is the frequency different? Is irritability worsening? All of these things, and they'll be fairly noticeable, but they're just things to keep an eye on ultimately. Am I saying you can never use Shilajit again because it's completely unsafe? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's responsible for us to not put the onus on the parent to have to spot potentially dangerous things, and that's why it's easier for us to remove it from the kit. Now, I suppose that brings us on to the point of, what does the juvenile kit still work? And the reason why I feel comfortable making this change is because a lot of the feedback that we got prior to putting this kit together was actually based off the lion's mane. So when we put the autism kit, or the ADHD and autism kit together, the focal point was, well, how do we optimize this? How do we make it as effective as possible? How do we, lion's mane works because it essentially helps to grow new neurons. It promotes neurological balance. It promotes, takes you out of a glutamate dominant state, which is essentially a hyperactive state. It brings you back into balance ultimately. That's what the Shilajit does. But in terms of healing these conditions or reversing these conditions, it doesn't remove the heavy metals. It does support the brain, it does support the glymphatic system, but it doesn't remove the heavy metals. So in putting together the ADHD and autism kit, the focal point was, well, how do we continue to bring about that positive symptom management, but how do we also go after the chronic underlying issue to hopefully alleviate these symptoms long term and not have to medicate for these symptoms. So that is the rationale. I just think we can do that with spirulina, which is a detox herb, particularly in toddlers. We're talking 2 to 4 year olds. Past the age of 13, you can kind of use your own discretion. But when we're talking about 2 to 4 year olds, the systems are very sensitive, and less is more. That's why if you haven't received the email with the updated dosages, then please do get in contact and we can send that over to you. But it basically, it's optimized for safety again. So it's not to say this is the maximum a child can take, or if you've been taking more than this, then it's going to be a problem. But it's start slow. That's if there's one thing to take from this update, it's definitely start slow, especially when you're dealing with toddlers, and monitor for symptoms. If you're going to be supplementing on your children, we always say get a pediatrician's advice. But the main thing I would say, just if I was speaking to my brother who has very young children, I would say be responsible. Make sure you are monitoring for any changes, monitoring changes in behavior, monitoring the more chronic changes like kidney changes, digestive changes, and start slow and start one at a time. Introduce one at a time. So that's probably my mistake in terms of, on previous sessions, I've probably said it's safe to introduce all the herbs at the same time. And yes, in 90% of cases, it will be completely fine. In 8% of those cases, it's probably going to cause some symptoms that you can reduce the load down if you notice them. And in 2% of cases, that child might just be too vulnerable where it could cause something a bit worse. So to avoid the 2%, ultimately, that's why, if you fall in that 2%, you don't want to be in that 2%. So that's why I would update the guidance to say, do one at a time, start with a half dose, use it for a week or two, see how your child is responding. And then if you want to then continue to stack after that, then that's an option. And I'd just say, continue to monitor. I think the important thing to say is most children will be fine. I just don't want to, be giving out advice that could cause anyone to make their child any worse. That's not what anyone wants. So, of course, there's a level of discretion involved in this, and you know your child better than anyone else. But I'm also aware that you are trusting me to give, non-medical advice, but still advice. So, yeah, that's what I would like to update in terms of the kit. As I say, for anyone who's interested in getting that updated dosages advice, ultimately, I've actually refined it now for the juvenile kit. So it's got the advice between 2 to 4 years old, then at 7 years old, then at 13 years old as well. So if you'd like to get that guidance, it's actually available on the website. We've put it on the ADHD and Autism Kit page, so you can get that right there. And then, yeah, if you want, more in-depth advice, you can definitely talk to me directly. We do have consultations available where some of the findings that we see in the consultations has actually it's blown my mind open in terms of you know we've been doing Magic Tree for about 5 years, 2026, about 5 years now. I've probably been researching the brain and how it works more specifically for about 2 3 years now. But since doing these consultations, it is particularly with autistic parents going through this and getting that first-hand real-time advice or feedback, I should say. It's been eye-opening to understand, and this is going to sound weird, how many situations aren't actually autism or ADHD. And when I say that, it sounds weird because you see your child maybe and this is both ADHD and autism. Maybe your child's stimming, maybe your child's toe walking, maybe your child is nonverbal, maybe your child poor eye contact, tantrums, meltdowns. All of these things can be true, and it's strange because by definition, you would say that, well, it's an observational diagnostic. So, to get an autism diagnosis, your child is observed, the behavior is observed. There's no test, there's no gene, there's no blood test, there's no stool test that can prove autism. It's just observational. So it's strange because by nature of having those symptoms, then yes, you have autism. What they say is true autism or pure autism is you've got an inbuilt neurological system wiring atypicalness, which is a vague definition of your brain doesn't work in a normal way, and that's the hard wiring of your brain. It's not been brought about. Sorry, it's not been brought about by something. It's not induced. That's how you are hardwired. That's what makes autism pure play autism. That's what makes ADHD pure play ADHD. They say there's thousands of different genes that can contribute to your risk factor of developing this neurological hardwiring. I'll let you try and explain what that means because I certainly don't get what that means. But the reason why it's a neat and an explanation that kind of stops you asking questions is because it's so vague. You say, well, I guess my child has the symptoms. The expert has seen those symptoms, and I guess they've said they're ADHD or autistic, and it's a lifelong condition. So that means I guess there's nothing I can do about it, and I just have to try and manage this as best I can. And there's no support from the government. No, there's minimal support in school. It depends which country you're in. Let me say that because if you're in Africa, autism is barely believed as a thing. So if you're in the UK, there's a bit more support, but again, not necessarily the support for, I speak to parents who have non-verbal 30-year-olds. That there's no support in the UK for that. So all that to say is my issue with an autism diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis. I guess I focus on autism a little bit more because that's who I see tend to, um, talk to us or inquire to us uh, about this autism kit. But yeah, all that to say, when you have a diagnosis, it keeps you in a place of hopelessness. It keeps you in a place of, I can't do anything about this. It keeps you in a place of being a victim, ultimately. So um, I'm not saying a lot of people do not have autism um, because I don't believe autism is a thing. I'm not saying it because I'm not saying most people don't have autism because I'm trying to debunk autism or say you should just be able to power your way through it. I'm saying it because there are so many other issues is what you would call them because they're not diseases, they're not symptoms, they're states of condition that can perfectly replicate autistic and ADHD symptoms. I just repeat that because it's a really, really, really important point that can change a lot of people's lives. There are at least 15 different conditions And I'm not talking about rare genetic conditions. I'm not talking about rare viruses or parasites that you'll pick up in the pits of swamps in, wherever. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying there are at least 10 to 15 common common things that can perfectly replicate autistic and ADHD symptoms that can be reversed. And when I say can be reversed, I'm literally talking about iron deficiency. I'm literally talking about B12 deficiency. So, typically there is a subset of factors at play that will cause metabolic distress or chronic immune signaling that will then put the pressure on the body to create a situation of low iron or high insulin or B12 deficiency that will then cause all of the neurological symptoms, all of them. Stimming, hand flapping, toe walking, non-verbal, poor communication, regression or regressive autism, if it comes in waves, if it's induced or changes with sleep or energy, all of these things point to you do not have autism because only again, I say this, and this isn't even a true fact because they say only 1 to 2% of the population have pure autism. And just to clarify, when I'm saying pure autism is you are hardwired to have neurological misfiring that will then cause the gut dysbiosis that's associated with autism. In the case of ADHD, you are hardwired to have an atypical stress response, an atypical cortisol response, a neurological reason you can't focus. That's what pure ADHD and autism is. That's what I say. Or not, I haven't got the numbers for ADHD, but they say 1 to 2% is for autism. But then they'd never test anyone. You get an ADHD, you get an autism diagnosis, you don't get, there's no neurological hardwiring test. So how do you know that? Because if everyone that gets diagnosed with autism is put into this bucket of 1 to 2%, then that number is inherently wrong because low iron can cause perfectly replicate autism symptoms. Mercury exposure can perfectly recreate autism symptoms. Even toxic MSG exposure and prenatal toxic MSG exposure can perfectly replicate ADHD and autism symptoms. So, how can we possibly say that even a significant fraction of all the people that get diagnosed with ADHD or autism actually have an irreversible condition? And that's my biggest problem with the industry today. Because every single person that receives that ADHD or autism diagnosis is led to believe they cannot heal. They have to deal with this for the rest of their life. And their only option is to medicate themselves with antipsychotics and antidepressants. Those are the options. So, um, in terms of my horse in this fight, I'm not a classically trained ADHD or autism expert. I'm not a neuro biologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medically trained person in this space, and I'm the first one to say that, and I constantly say it. When people DM me and say, "Hi, doctor," I always say, "I'm not a doctor. I'm just someone who's done a lot of research and read a lot of books." So, um, I suppose, yeah, Jane whispering in my ear. I am a qualified naturopath and I am a qualified master herbalist. The reason I don't even mention that is because do either of those qualifications qualify me to talk about ADHD or autism? No, I don't think it does. If I was, if it was, if I was recommending my friend and they said, "Oh yeah, I know someone who's done the same qualifications I've done. Should I talk to them about ADHD and autism?" I'd say, "Well, what do they know about ADHD and autism?" Because it doesn't equip you to understand these topics well. Obviously, it lays a foundation for you to be able to research better, but that's not the same thing. So, the reason I say this and the reason why I'm making kind of an update on this live session is because I'm seeing it in real time every week. I'm seeing this literally on Friday. I was talking to a lady in Nigeria, 8-year-old autistic son. Didn't even question the autism diagnosis. I guess, as I said before, in some countries, autism is only recently being accepted as a real thing. Nigeria being one of those countries. So, and, she has a medical background. So when we're talking, it's like, well, he was diagnosed autistic, and then probably spent thousands on all the tests that had been done. And actually, I'm gonna actually take my words back again, because there is something I've said previously, which I'm gonna take back when we're talking about autism and ADHD actually. Um, and yeah, she'd probably spent thousands on tests over the years and kept a great record of, all the biomarkers, liver enzymes, blood tests, heavy metal tests, um, thyroid tests, kidney function, all the different tests, kept really good records over a 5-year span. So from when they first noticed symptoms at 2 years old all the way through to 7, um, clean labs. Now, I say clean, clear labs, because who knows what could mess up a single reading. That's why it's good to have it over a time span. So yeah, and in that case, well, yeah, I'll explain that case and then explain why I'm going to eat my words on the labs, or alter my words on the labs. So in that case, the reason why it's difficult is because there are, she must have sent 20 different lab reports over a 5-year span. And the recommended ranges you have to take with a pinch of salt, because recommended ranges for who? Because recommended ranges alongside what other, discrepancies you might see. So you have to, yeah, it's almost like an art as opposed to a science, because you have to look at this, tie that dot to tie that dot. And a lot of the times I feel like most of the times you end up going in circles, taking a load of supplements to try and correct what is an effect rather than the cause. You end up burdening the liver, you end up burdening the kidneys because you're taking so many supplements. You go around in circles and get no closer to the actual issue. That's what I see typically when, especially when you've just done it once, or you've just done it once 5 years ago and then once again today. There's not much to be garnered typically from those types of testings. However, in the case of the lady I was speaking to, something jumped off the page, and I didn't even see it initially. It's only when I was actually researching other causes that can perfectly replicate autistic symptoms did it then jump off the page. And this is why I say, when you've got 20 pages of numbers and everything's just slightly out of range, it's like, well, what am I actually looking at here? So on those results, there was ferritin, and it's sneaky because the accepted range of ferritin is actually 20 to 50, I want to say, and at 20 to 50, ferritin is low enough to, especially in children, to actually cause neurological symptoms. Probably not full blown, autism, but ADHD for sure. Then so when you're looking at test results, you're saying, okay, it's in normal range, no problem. Then in the most recent blood test results, it dropped to 5. Now, below 15, you can see, full-blown autism symptoms. It's a sign of metabolic stress. We also saw high insulin, another sign of metabolic stress. We also saw high AST, another sign of metabolic stress. Now, if we're seeing symptoms correlate to metabolic stress, or if we are seeing, I mean, there's lots of different factors, and this is why it's almost an art rather than a science. But then you can start to pursue a different diagnosis. Then you can say, "Well, actually, maybe I have neurological symptoms from this ferritin issue. And actually, the ferritin issue explains the insulin issue. Actually, the ferritin issue explains why the AST is low. Actually, the ferritin, um, there were so many other things I did explain in this 20 pages of test results, but then you can start to tie a story together. So, look, I'll caveat and say this: testing is expensive generally, and not everyone can afford to do it. Not everyone can do it every 6 months to have a clean set over 5 years. So I understand that is a luxury. But when you do have that, it can really paint a picture in terms of, is this a lifelong condition, or is this a metabolic state that requires some nutritional support? I think I saw a question, are you saying it's a nutritional deficiency? I'm not saying all autism is a nutritional deficiency. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is there's a lot of people who have replicated autistic symptoms as a result of a nutritional deficiency. So, and again, it can be more complex than that because someone will then say, I say, oh, you've got low iron because your ferritin is low. So that ferritin is stored iron basically. So you've got your iron, which is free iron available in the blood. Then you've got your transferrin, which is kind of semi-available iron, and then you've got your ferritin, which is your stored iron, so your iron reserves. So when ferritin is low and you've got regular iron, even sometimes regular transferrin, then that's a sign that your body's under metabolic stress. I forgot where I was going with this now. When you've got high insulin, that's a sign of metabolic stress. So when you have labs that can demonstrate a picture of metabolic deficiency, metabolic stress, mitochondrial burden, then you can start to look at alternatives. Then you can start to explore different angles. That's what I was saying. Yeah. And then it gets more complex because then I say, okay, you've got an iron deficiency. All you need to do is take an iron supplement. Then you take the iron supplement and your autism doesn't improve or your ferritin levels don't increase because you might have a methylation issue that stops you from being able to absorb that iron. Then you might need to try a different iron. But before you get to that point, you've already given up. You've already said, oh, well, I tried the iron, it didn't work. A lot of people will try the iron and not get retested. So you say, okay, I've got this low iron. Maybe it's not as obvious as 5, maybe it's at 20 or something like that. So you say, okay, I'm going to try this iron. You try the iron for 6 months. You follow the protocol, no improvement. You don't bother getting retested because you've been taking the iron. All the while, your ferritin hasn't actually increased because you're not able to absorb that iron. You're not able to, or even if you are able to absorb that iron, you might not be able to traffic that iron to where it can be stored. So there's so many layers and levels to it that it can get quite complex, and that's where the art comes in. So it's definitely not a straightforward thing. It's definitely something you need to try and error with. But it's look, if you have a non-verbal child, I'm not a parent, so I'm saying this based off the parents I speak to, based off what I imagine I would want. But if you have a non-verbal child, I imagine there's nothing in the world you want more than to, be able to communicate with your child and let your child, communicate and enjoy a wonderful life. So yes, it's not a straightforward, oh look, the test says this, so it must be that. It's not as straightforward as you take the iron supplement for 2 months and everything should be fixed hunky dory. It might take a year to replenish that iron, but what we're looking for is signals and markers. It might not if you have a complex recipe of issues because of the metabolic stress and the way it's come about, then that can cause an issue again. So you definitely want support through that process rather than muddling through yourself. That's why I find the consultation so useful. But at the same time, if you've got a non-verbal 10-year-old child and you've been told they're autistic, that does not mean that doesn't mean they have to be non-verbal for the rest of their life. That doesn't mean there is no way to improve, their neurological development. Because if it is something as simple as high insulin, that's something that can be brought down. If it is something as simple as low iron levels, we can fix that. If it is something like heavy metals in the brain, we can detox that. If it's something more complex like prenatal toxic exposure, then we can probably make big inroads into that. I'm not saying we'll be able to fix it completely because it depends on the damage to the brain that would have been caused from the prenatal toxin, but that we can definitely improve symptoms. If it's a B12 deficiency, we can definitely support that. So, where it gets really tricky, particularly with autism, is what they say is, well, if you're autistic, you struggle to digest B12. Well, it's really common if you are autistic, you're going to have gut dysbiosis. Well, it's really common if you're autistic, you struggle to process iron. Now, again, that takes all causality away and it takes all impetus from a lazy diagnosis of autism away because you just say, oh, well, my child's got low iron because they're autistic. So I guess it's just something they have. When it could actually be the other way around. And what they might have is a genetic factor that stops them from being able to methylate a certain type of B12. So there's lots of different types of B12. There's methylcobalamin, there's adenosocobalamin, different types of B12. Now, different types of gene variations will stop you from being able to absorb certain types of B12. Now, okay, that's a genetic issue. Now, I'm going to start to unfold how a genetic explanation of autism comes about. So you have this actual genetic condition that stops you from being able to digest B12, okay, or process B12, okay. Now you have a B12 deficiency, which essentially stops your brain from being able to send the signals it's supposed to efficiently. Now you become irritable. Now you can't focus. Now your communication gets worse. Now you might develop auditory disorders as well. All of these different things, um, and then you get an ADHD diagnosis. And then you say, okay, well, I guess the ADHD diagnosis was caused from my genetic issue with the B12. When no, that's not the case because there are other things we can do to help you digest that B12 better. You know, food form B12, getting that B12 from other sources, correcting other nutritional deficiencies that stop you from being able to absorb B12. So many different things that we can try and explore before we just lazily accept. And let me not even use the word lazily because that implies that it's your fault. That implies that you're not working hard enough. And that's definitely not what it is. You have trust in the experts, you have trust in the doctors, you have trust in people like me to give you good advice. And you're here today, you know, you're listening to me, so I'm assuming you care what I've got to say. And I'm telling you, please do not take an autism or ADHD diagnosis as a lifelong condemnment because it just stops you from researching what your actual issue is. The actual issue persists, and then it does become a lifelong condition. Not because you have a hard wiring issue, it could just be something as simple as, you know, and this is another one that annoys me, gut dysbiosis. They say, well, gut dysbiosis is an autistic issue. Okay, right. But then, so what actual autistic gut dysbiosis is when you have the hard autistic hardwiring, pure play autistic hardwiring, it puts pressure on your vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve is responsible for pumping stomach acid into your stomach. When your stomach acid is too low, food can get through to your stomach acid into your gut without being properly digested, without being having the bacteria killed off. Now, your gut microbiome has to adapt and respond to all these new bacteria that's coming in, and it goes into survival mode. So it might shut down, it might take away your appetite, it might stop you from eating certain foods altogether. That's pure play autistic gut dysbiosis. Certain bacteria don't get formed. So, did let me start. That's weird. Yeah, so the bacteria that digests oxalates. You might not have that if you're pure play autistic, and you might struggle to eat sweet potato, green leafy vegetables, powerful vegetables in high quantities. That can happen. But it can also happen the other way around, where you are eating too many meats, or you have a really bad case of food poisoning, you have chronic acidosis in the system, you have a viral infection that causes acidosis in the system, then that creates gut permeability. You might have H. pylori, which ups ammonia, which can cause leaky gut, and then you have leaky gut, and then that can cause a load of neurological symptoms in and itself. Leaky gut can cause neurological symptoms in and itself because pathogens can escape to the brain, bypass the blood-brain barrier. So guys, please do not take the diagnosis as that is the root cause and every other issue you have aside from that diagnosis is because of the diagnosis. Because when you get the diagnosis, they do not do a full set of labs. When you get the diagnosis, they do not do stool tests over a span of years to understand the changes. When you get the diagnosis, they aren't looking at what your viral load is. And even if they do, even if you do the labs, even if you send over your hair toxin test, all that is testing for is the toxins that are leaving the body, not the toxins that are inside the body. If it's in the hair, it's not inside your brain. If it's in your blood, it's not inside your brain. If it's in your urine, it's not inside your brain. The only way to test for toxins inside the brain would be a brain biopsy. And they don't do that for obvious reasons. So, and even then, if you have clusters, because you've got to remember, metals are magnetic, so they stick together. So if you have a clump of mercury in your brain right here, which can happen, and then you take a brain biopsy from here, what's it going to show? No metals. Does that mean no metals were in your brain? No, it doesn't. So it's really important to understand that even the most well-intentioned autistic diagnosticians do not have the tools to rule out other symptoms. There is no way to know if you have high levels of mercury in the brain. An autism diagnostician is not looking at insulin levels in the blood. They're not looking at ferritin levels typically. They're not looking at the link. Um, even another one that's super, I guess, interesting. If someone has low ferritin levels because their iron intake is low, fairly menial issue. Um, Something as simple as a growth spurt, just a growth spurt. All children go through it. All children go through it. Something as simple as a growth spurt can put the metabolic state under enough stress that your ferritin levels can then drop to seriously low levels and trigger the step up in autistic symptoms or ADHD symptoms. Then, because if those growth spurts are sustained over a course of months or years, then that can create high insulin. Then, if you have high insulin, it creates a compound called hepcidin. Hepcidin locks away iron. So then your ferritin gets even worse. Creates this downward spiral that can persist for years after the growth spurt has stopped, which keeps the ferritin low, which keeps the neurological symptoms high. So you can have autistic symptoms that present themselves for years or decades just because you had dietary low levels of iron as a 2, 3, 4 year old and a growth spurt. How crazy is that? That's not autism. That is a growth spurt and not eating enough meat. That's as simple as what that is. So, look, guys, I don't want to. At the same time, I know I'm saying this. I don't want to um, oversimplify and make out that everyone with an autistic diagnosis or everyone with an ADHD diagnosis hasn't got one. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that they've got everyone wrong. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is there are a lot of people who are dealing with this situation as though it's a lifelong condition when it's not. And one thing I personally want to commit to, and it's things as that transferrin, ferritin, insulin, as I said, that happened last Friday. This is someone who spent thousands of pounds on testing, research with experts across the world. Um, what's name? My what? Okay. What are we talking about? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is someone who has spent thousands of pounds researching, and they may not actually be dealing with an autism issue. So, guys, what I want to say is, um, if they're saying autism is lifelong anyway, then you might as well spend that lifelong diagnosis trying to figure out if it could be anything else. Because what's the difference? It either is lifelong because you're in that 1% of pure play autism, and you're still going to want to be managing the symptoms because the same things that could cause autism would also stress autism. So if you do have low iron, that's going to make your autistic symptoms worse. If you do have low B12, that's going to make your autistic or ADHD symptoms worse. If you do have adrenal fatigue, that's going to make the symptoms worse. If you do have heavy metal exposure, that's going to make things worse. So it's not to say by going on this wild goose chase, you're wasting all your time when you could be doing something more valuable. No, it's still super useful to be on top of these things. And if you get the test and it's all in normal levels, then again, what is normal? But I'm not saying you need to spend years and years digging deeper research into it. I'm just saying, look, it's worth doing that checklist to make sure you don't fall into that bucket. So, one thing I am going to be trying to put forward or trying to create is a checklist. And it's going to be a checklist to help you understand. Again, there's nothing guaranteed with this, but it's to help you understand if you tick any of these boxes, you may not be dealing with pure autism or pure ADHD. And just to reiterate, I know there's some new people that have been joining throughout the session. Pure autism, pure ADHD, that is, you are born hardwired with a neurological system that is um, ill-equipped to handle the stresses. It doesn't respond in the same way as a neurotypical person would. Um, and there's lots of other kind of symptoms that fall out of that. But pure essentially means you were born that way and you are hardwired that way, and there is nothing you can do to change that hard wiring. That's what pure is. They say 1 to 2% of people fall into that bucket, but no one ever gets tested to see if you are hardwired. And there are at least 15 other things that are proven to perfectly replicate ADHD and autistic symptoms, 15 different things on both sides, and some of those things cross over. So it stands to reason a lot of people who end up with an autistic or ADHD diagnosis do not actually have pure ADHD or autism. And if you don't have pure ADHD or autism, in most of those cases, it is reversible. I'm not saying it's reversible overnight. I'm not saying it's reversible with one pill. Sometimes it might take years. Sometimes you're just lowering the toxic load, the viral load, reducing the immune system pressure. That can alleviate symptoms. So maybe a cure isn't the best word there, but you're alleviating symptoms. And actually, on reflection, I think a lot of the reasons why our autism and ADHD kit has been effective is probably because a lot of people who are dealing with these other issues, which can perfectly replicate autism and ADHD, are taking the kit, fixing those issues, and oh, actually, the symptoms have reduced, or in some cases, gone away. So, um, that's why I would definitely recommend exploring it because, as I say, even if you go on the wild goose hunt and you look at all these other symptoms, all you're going to be doing is managing the symptoms anyway. There's no harm in doing any of this stuff. The only thing is you might have to pay a bit on testing. That's the reality. Um, so yeah, let me just touch on testing because I know a lot of parents are kind of testing blind, I would say, where they just said, well, I got the test and I don't even know, I just got the gut test, I got the stool test. Someone told me they might have SIBO, so I got the SIBO test. Um, yeah, genetic test, methylation test. There's so many tests that companies are charging big money for. Um, and you know what? This is where I said I'm going to eat my own words because I said the tests are pretty useless, and I'll refine that to say for most people the tests aren't helpful and will send you on a wild goose chase. But if you have someone to support you through reading the results to understand and build a theory out of it, then they can be very useful. Similar to the situation I spoke about on Friday, where at first glance it was like, oof, well, where do we even start with this? But then actually, when you start to paint a picture and you can put the dots together, then it can lead to hopefully a new path to go down. And look, I'm not saying I always say this when I do these consultations and we're talking about autism and ADHD. I'm not the neuroatypical whisperer. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm more than happy to admit when I'm wrong. I'm more than happy to say I don't know everything. Even things like updating the Shilajit from the bundle. Look, we're not too proud to say things can be improved. We can do it a better way. We're not too proud to, stand in front of you on a live session and say why, to offer the guidance, to offer the advice, to give you the opportunity to ask real-time questions as well. If you're someone who has been using the kit and you're thinking, oh my God, I've been taking Shilajit, I've been giving my child Shilajit, what's going on? Now's the time to ask me the question. So, all that to say, look, I'm not claiming to have all the information. I'm not claiming to say everything I say is guaranteed to be right. I'm definitely learning every day because I speak to autistic parents every day. And every time I speak to an autistic parent or an autistic adult or someone with ADHD who tells me about their condition, I can learn because Google can only tell me so much. If I'm researching papers, it can only tell me so much. Someone who's telling me they have an ADHD diagnosis and telling me their symptoms and telling me their experiences, telling me their life, there's nothing more valuable than that. So if I wasn't learning, there'd be something wrong. And with that, it means I can become a better um, artist, I would say, in terms of interpreting those test results, in terms of tying symptoms together. I say the thing I think is most useful about my approach is that I'm not an autism expert, I'm not an ADHD expert, I'm not a brain expert. I look at everything. I'm not an expert in anything. I look at everything, but I look at viruses, I look at mold, I look at bacteria, I look at metabolic states, I look at the pH of different symptoms, I look at the gut, I look at the liver as a key driver. I look at the hormonal basis. I look at women's symptoms and understand, well, why do women suffer from certain things that men don't? So, there's so many different angles I can look at things through to try to paint pictures together and figure out protocols to test those. I say that's where the value add is, and that's why I definitely want to be helping more people in this space and using test results in this space in that way. So when I say I eat my words, test results are not useless. That's what I'm eating. I think if you can create and build a picture consistent over a year, a minimum of a year, then we can use that to start to try and pin certain things and build certain things. Look, one test might be sufficient because if something's jumping off the page, you can start to build a picture. That again, that would be a starting point, not an end point, but it's definitely scope to build on. So, Mimi Jabril has just asked how.
I was waiting for you to finish. So she said that she's using flaxseed oil alongside CMOS and Shilajit for autism, but she now understands to stop using the Shilajit. So she's asking how to use flaxseed oil for autism.
So black seed oil isn't an autism herb. I mean, it's not. I mean, how do you know how old her child is? Maybe if you let me know how old your child is, I can be more specific because it does change significantly between kind of 2 and 7. So, but yeah, generally speaking, black seed oil is not a autism herb because black seed oil goes after pathogens mostly. It's an immunomodulator, but it's not kind of a brain booster. It's not nutrient rich in that sense. It's an antioxidant. It's a brain protector. Um, but in terms of, when we're talking about, I use the word healing sparingly, managing autism or healing autism, something that presents as autism, black seed oil wouldn't be super high on the list. In some cases, it might be recommended if there's, immune system stress or constant viral load that is worsening the autism, or an immune stressor like acne, or a persistent stressor like acne, asthma, eczema, all of these things, then yes, black seed oil could be helpful. Um, but it wouldn't be the first point of call. So, um, yeah, the Shilajit we've discussed, and then you said the CMOS. So again, CMOS, you might find all of those herbs would help your autistic child because CMOS can help the gut microbiome. Black seed oil can help knock down pathological issues. Shilajit can help nutrient absorption. So if there was a nutrient absorb, if say the autism was caused by um, persistent metabolic stress. 11. Okay. So fine, bit safer then. So let's say the issue was caused by persistent metabolic stress. That could be growth spurts, that could be trauma, that could be traveling, that could be vaccines, that could be just recurring chest infections, ear infections, anything really. If the system's under persistent metabolic stress and the diet isn't the best, so there's some gut dysbiosis, and that's what's causing the neurological symptoms essentially. Is it autism or ADHD? Autism. So I guess it'd probably be more severe metabolic distress, but you could definitely look at some markers. I'd definitely recommend looking at the ferritin, look at the insulin, look at the AST. That would all signal metabolic distress. Um, there's other things like, do the symptoms flare up? Do they come and go? Are they worse after a bad night's sleep? Are they there's certain foods make it worse? All of these things would, if autism is you were born with it and you're hardwired that way, it shouldn't fluctuate that much. So yeah, obviously behavior will, vary day to day, but I'm saying if the stimming just goes away one day, if the toe walking just goes away one week and it's back the next week, if communication fluctuates significantly, then all of these things would indicate that there's actually something physiological rather than neurological causing it. So look, guys, I don't want to be giving out kind of half baked. Yeah, Yeah, so I don't want to be giving out half-baked, lazy diagnoses on live sessions with half facts and not that much information. Um, that's why the consultations are best because we can talk through, specifically how did those symptoms develop, what testing have you done, what makes it worse, all of these things can help paint a better picture. Um, One thing I will say as well for people who maybe have booked a consultation previously or thinking about booking a consultation or bought the kit, as I say, I'm always learning, I'm always evolving. So if I've said something last month, I might read something next month, I might speak to a parent next month that unlocks a different part of the puzzle. So what I actually find quite frequently is I'll go back to people I've spoken to a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and say, oh, actually, this thing in your test results actually makes sense now. Or, oh, you said this thing, and now I actually understand how that makes more sense. So um, it's definitely we're definitely looking to um, you know, build, as I say, I want to build that checklist. I didn't realize how much of an issue it was until the last 2 months. So I definitely want to be a market leader in terms of being able to provide support to parents in particular struggling with, I suppose, children going through these things because yeah, the lack of support it really upsets me to be honest. And if we can create something as simple as a checklist where you can just look at it and say, oh, actually, yeah, the ferritin results were low, the insulin is high, it does get worse with sleep. He did get a chest infection, or she did get a chest infection before symptoms first arose. Symptoms didn't just gradually develop; they did happen in steps. All of these things can save parents and children a lifetime of it's hard to find the word, but a lifetime of essentially struggling, and it doesn't need to be that way. So look, that's what we're looking to do. We're going to continue, and that's a work in progress document. That's always going to be evolving. It will also require you guys' feedback as well. The more feedback we get, the more helpful it is. You know, and just to ease the minds of anyone who has been using Shilajit, we've sold I think 200 kits in the last 2 months, um, and only one person actually came back to us and said stool has become
So Jessica put a message in here on this line and said that
sorry.
Jessica
Yeah.
put a comment here. So she's given the tea twice, but she had a funny tongue day Friday.
Okay. So yeah. Um, yeah, so only one person's come back and said stool has changed and noticed that symptom. So it's not to say everyone who has tried it will experience that. And the simplest thing is if you do notice anything obscure, stop using it. Particularly for young children, particularly if they're toddlers, particularly if they are um, you know, hyper excitability and these kind of things, because the herbs have a more volatile chemical interaction in certain neurosystems. So that's why it's to be on the safe side. Um, so yeah. So as I was saying, yes, checklist. We're gonna be putting a checklist together to help you understand whether it's likely to be pure play autism. Of course, it's not gospel. Of course, it's not something to be taken as fact, but it's a starting point to hopefully able to put you on the right next step of your journey. So it will say, okay, maybe I should get this tested. And then if you get that tested and this presents, okay, maybe I need to move in this direction. So I don't know how exactly we're going to do it in my head. I want it to be like some sort of tree diagram where it's like, oh, okay, this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, let me get this tested. And if that comes up, then I should go here. If not, it should go here. That's obviously very elaborate and complex. So it's probably going to start quite simple and build out from there. But I just want to let you guys know, like, that's our kind of commitment to this space. That's our commitment to help you guys who are dealing with this and don't have the support. That's our commitment to be on the forefront of research in this space, to be, trying to find solutions for you as opposed to, because none of that is to do with even selling herbs, to be honest. So it's not even about that. It's more about I don't want parents or children suffering with lifelong conditions that aren't lifelong. That's ultimately what it is. So Yeah, look, guys. I think we've answered a few questions throughout. I don't know if Jade, you've seen any questions that are worth touching on. Otherwise, we'll leave this one a bit of a shorter session today. I just wanted to kind of jump on, give people the opportunity to ask questions, especially if you have been using the kit and you wanted to get just some peace of mind or some guidance. Then yeah, I just wanted to be here to give you guys the chance to ask those questions live, express what we are looking to do in the space. Oh, I didn't really mention the juvenile kit. So we have launched the juvenile.
Go through the hubs.
Yeah, so we have launched the juvenile kit. Um, it's basically a redacted version of the adult kit. So the juvenile kit is lion's mane, but a hot water extract rather than a jewel extract. So essentially, it's just more gentle on the nervous system. So it's more gentle on a sensitive nervous system, which in autistic and but I mean for ADHD, it's fine because you're not as glutamate dominant than an autistic nervous system. So, but yeah, we've changed the lion's mane. We've also the Brahmi is the same, and then we've also taken the Shilajit out as we've discussed, and the spirulina remains. So what the main difference is how to use the kit. So rather than using all the herbs every day, we recommend cycling the herbs, so one herb a day, and then taking a break on that fourth day. We also recommend cutting the dosages down, starting with half the recommended dosage as well. Important to note, it's not recommended dosages on the packets. It will be recommended dosages in the ADHD guide that you get when you purchase the kit, or the updated ADHD guide that you will have been sent last week if you've already purchased the kit. So, um, yeah, that those are the main changes. That's the reason why the juvenile kit is there. Also, for anyone who has, purchased the ADHD kit, and you're thinking, oh, I've just bought the kit and now you're telling me I can't use it. We are offering refunds, or we can swap it for a juvenile kit, if you want to do that as well. So just wanted to let you guys know that as well. I've just seen a question. So what will this do to the typical autism characteristics or traits? So that's the juvenile kit you're asking about, I'm guessing. So essentially, what it does is manage a lot of the symptoms. So, someone who has, you say, autism, right? So, someone who is autistic is most likely hypersensitive. So, essentially, what the lion's mane, what the Brahmi does, it turns the vagus nerve on to calm you down. Someone who is autistic generally will have neurological damaged neurons, so damaged brain cells. What the lion's mane and the Brahmi does, it helps to rebuild and grow new brain cells, new synaptic pathways, new connections in the brain to learn and develop in new ways. That's also why it's so effective in terms of speech development as well. Um, Other symptoms. So yeah, I mean, in terms of stimming and stuff like that. So what stimming is, it's the brain trying to find stability to bring cortisol down. Or when you're overstimulated, it's a crutch to essentially that regular movement, that persistent movement, kind of gives the brain something to focus on, so it can calm down. So the lion's mane can help with that, and the Brahmi can help with that because it calms the nervous system down essentially. The spirulina is the detox, so that's the healer. So it gets the heavy metals out of the brain. Again, with the updated guidance is to do that slower because an autistic detoxing system can be less efficient. So if you release metals from the gut, from the brain, then they circulate around the system. If you don't have, your lymphatic system firing ready to get rid of it, if you don't have nutrients ready to buy into those toxins to get rid of them. So slower is better in that sense. So there's less toxins that get released, easier for them to actually get removed. Symptoms improve over time. So hopefully that explains the juvenile kit. That's live on the website for anyone who's interested. As I say, if you've already purchased the full ADHD kit with the Shilajit, then let us know and we can sort out a replacement or a refund, or something that makes sense for you. Because I know some people maybe want the Shilajit and they want to use it for themselves, or um,
Oh, the person asked for a 23-year-old young man about the characteristics and traits question.
yeah, that was what will the what will this do to the type of, yeah, he's talking about call me Marmite.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've answered that one, I think.
Or
All
is she talking from the perspective of juvenile?
right. No, same thing. Yeah. Um, okay, I have a little scroll.
It's not many questions.
Okay,
I found answering maybe five, 15 and nothing else. And
okay.
yeah, apart from this hot topic.
Cool. All right. Yeah, we'll keep it to autism and ADHD today. For anyone who's asked a question, I saw one about IBS and stuff. For anyone who's asked a question off topic, we're going to be back on Wednesday. So feel free to join the session then, and it'll be more not about autism, so it'll be able to answer those questions. Um, uh, so Vivian has shared a comment, and I'll read. I haven't actually read it yet, but it looks it's from the perspective of someone who's got a diagnosis. I think it's always important on Facebook. I think it's always important to share that because I'm aware I'm somewhat. I don't know if I've on the spectrum. Everyone's. I mean, it's a spectrum, right? And people tell me I'm autistic all the time, but I don't know if I'm on the autism spectrum. I'm not someone who identifies as having autism, so I'm acutely aware that I'm speaking on issues I have no idea on what it's like to experience. So whenever someone who has that first-hand experience shares their perspective, I think it's important to share that and update the thinking with that. So yeah, Vivian said, I don't agree with that assessment of keeping you in the place of being a victim. So I guess what she's saying is, what's going on outside? I I don't agree that an autism assessment keeps you in the place of being a victim. It depends on how it's approached. I'm a therapist, and I even have a husband who has autism. I teach my clients that it's a spectrum, just like everything else. There's people on the spectrum who are absolutely brilliant, and there's people on the spectrum who are not, and there's everything in between. And I see it as a difference, not a deficit. There are things that people under autism spectrum excel at, such as maintaining routines, which I struggle with. People on the autism spectrum can learn social skills and the things that come more naturally to the rest of us. Um, on the other hand, at their there's things at their laser light focus makes them better at. Someone who's not on the spectrum may have to work very hard to learn. Is all the way it's presented. If it is presented with this narrow and negative scope without paying attention to anything positive, that may be gleaned from it. That is what leads to a poor outcome. Uh, it does a disservice to the client and the people working with them who sorry, it does a disservice. It keeps updating, that's why it's moving. Where did it go? It does a disservice to the client and the people working with them who try to say, hey, this is what this diagnosis is, so that we can work to getting them to a place where they want to be. Denying it is akin to denying you have a gunshot wound and hoping that it will go away instead of getting the help that you need to get better. So firstly, thank you, Vivian, for sharing that. Look, I'll explain why I disagree with you, but at the same time, that's not what I'm talking about. So, as I said at the start, I'm not. It's not about denying autism exists. It's not about saying no one has true autism. What I'm saying is there's a difference between pure autism and someone who has autism-induced symptoms as a result of something that can be reversed. And I say that this comes up whenever I talk about autism. Maybe I should do a better job of caveating it at the start of these sessions. But yes, there are, like, as I said, people say I'm on the autism spectrum. Do I feel like I have any downside? Maybe Jade will say I do, but I'm not someone who's going to pretend to be an autism sufferer because I don't feel like I suffer. There's lots of people who will, lots of successful autistic people who will accredit their ability to lock in and do things as a result of their autism. I'm sure Bill Gates will say his ability to code for 15 hours a day as a result of autism is not something he would, give up. So I'm not saying I've never said that autism carries no benefits. The reason why it's not the focal point of this conversation is because we're a healing company. We're talking about healing. So I'm talking about the negative autism traits or symptoms. Obviously, if someone's fantastic at maths as a result of autism, that's not something they're trying to heal from. However, if you've got a parent who has a non-verbal child who doesn't eat food and doesn't can't sleep, sleeps 2 hours a night, bangs their head against the headboard all night, can't nurseries refuse to accept them or struggle to keep a place in nursery as a result of their autistic symptoms, then yes, that's a problem. That's a struggle, and that's not speaking badly on the child. That's not blaming the child. That's not speaking badly on the parent. That's acknowledging that most people do not want a child banging their head on the headboard because it's dangerous. That's what the problem is there. So very specific when we're talking about healing and what are we trying to address here. It's not about ignoring the autism spectrum. It's about there are people who are struggling that can get support. And when we just say, well, it's a spectrum, just let everyone be everyone, we're denying them that support because not everyone with autism doesn't want support. This is something that I got wrong before. Before we launched the kit, I thought, yeah, I mean, most people, for most people, it's just they're probably good at maths and maybe they struggle to communicate, but they're fine. And then we launched the ADHD and autism kit, and it became the bestseller overnight. So clearly, there are people who are,
We spoke to as well.
yeah. So I mean, that was the first stage. Clearly, there are people who don't see it as all rainbows and sunshine. It's not all about acceptance. And if there's something that can be done to help, then let's explore that. Um, it's akin to, I think, with your gunshot example. Yes, the diagnosis of a gunshot. I'm not saying ignore diagnosis. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying get the right diagnosis. I'm saying you see a hole. So the equivalent of what you're saying is, well, there's a hole in your leg. It looks like it's the same size as a bullet, so therefore it must be a gunshot wound. That's what an autism diagnosis is because they don't go into the wound, they don't find the bullet, they just say it's a gunshot wound. So if we can get a better diagnosis and say, oh, actually, it's not a gunshot wound, it's bacteria eating away at your leg
Sepsis.
in the shape of a bullet. It's a knife wound. It's a all the different examples that it may be. Then that is what the issue with that diagnosis is. It's not a good diagnostic process. It's just, well, we see these symptoms, so therefore it must be ADHD, or it must be autism. And what I'm telling you as a fact, there are at least 10 common deficiencies, metabolic states, viral conditions that can perfectly replicate autism. So to just sit with the diagnosis and say, well, I have to accept it, that's the in denial part. That's not not what I'm saying. So, Vivian, I understand what you're saying in the context of let's not try and reject reality. And if you do have an autistic child, you have to accept that. Yeah, once we've actually explored all the options, then we can accept that and figure out management. But if something is curable, if something is fixable, we don't need to live in management. We can live in let's try and cure, which is, and again, when we use language of, well, we shouldn't talk about cure when we're talking about autism, we shouldn't talk about cure because that sounds like there's something wrong with the child. If a child is banging their head against the headboard, that's something dangerous that we need to try and cure first. Look, if there's nothing we can do about it, then we have to accept it and manage it. But there's an order to how we should approach these things. So hopefully that clarifies that.
Sorry, I can't see these comments you're getting on Facebook, so if you
Um,
could read them, then yeah.
yeah, yeah, I kind of see them. So look, Lola said, how can we raise B12? There's B12 supplements you can do. There's depends how old as well, because certain supplements that are rich in B12 wouldn't necessarily be beneficial for super young children. So sometimes a synthetic supplement is best. Sometimes food is best. Um, you know, I'd say, Magic Tree, we always talk about natural supplements, natural herbs, stay away from supplements. As we delve into this new space of dealing with autistic children, we do have to be more versatile. Sometimes I will recommend a synthetic supplement because if you have a gut microbiome that doesn't allow you to eat the green leafy vegetables in sufficient amounts that will actually give you the nutrients to correct that nutritional deficiency, then sometimes a clean supplement will be better. And again, that's not to say that you need to do that for the rest of your life. you do the medication dose, and then we can try and manage through diet and lifestyle and herbs if necessary. If we're dealing with 2 and 3 year olds, herbs are riskier than just using a pure synthetic supplement. So that's where we're probably going to be a bit more versatile in our approach now. So, and I guess, look, when it comes to just buying the ADHD kit off the website, we can't give a tailored program to every single person. When I say that, I'm more speaking to if you book a consultation, if you, if we're having that one-to-one dialogue, if you have the test results, then that's when I'd really say, yeah, push, and let's try and create a personal protocol rather than just, well, you've got the diagnosis, how can we manage the symptoms? So yeah, if you have done the testing and you've gone to the functional doctors and you've tried the things and you haven't got clear answers, then I would say book a consultation. Um, we're doing so much in that space. We're getting so much real-time feedback. I think we can help. In terms of the checklist, that's something we're going to be building over the next few weeks and months to help people who are coming across this. And then yeah, I think that's kind of all the updates. As I said, we've launched the juvenile kit. We have the ADHD kit is still there for adults dealing with autism and ADHD. As I say, if you are someone who is using Shilajit, has used Shilajit, I would just say look out for changes in irritability, changes in mood, changes in kidney function, so urine, changes in stool. If you do see any of these changes, just stop taking the supplements, and things should correct within 6 weeks. If not, get in contact. But yeah, thank you guys. Again, a bit of a different session to normal. We'll be back on Wednesday with a more typical session. But good to get this information out there. Hopefully, some of you guys found it useful. Hopefully, some of the parents listening, particularly, will find it useful. Anyone going through any of these conditions themselves will find it useful. Um,
So someone just last question, would you recommend for a 13-year-old with some ADHD, if you just want to say and point them in the right direction with TikTok?
yeah, look, so 13, first point of call, I'd probably stick with the juvenile kit, but increase the dosages up. So following the 13-year-old dosages, that would be the first point of call. Now, if you have the lab results, this is my advice for anyone. First point of call would be the juvenile kit or the ADHD kit, depending on your age, and then following the guidance. That should help manage most people's symptoms because regardless whether it's pure autism, pure ADHD, or a deficiency that's causing the neurological symptoms, it's probably going to help because of what the herbs do. They address pretty much all of those symptoms, or at least reduce the triggers of some of those symptoms that can make it worse. So that would still be the first point of call. Now, if you have lab results that you've done already, if you have methylation tests and you've done all these tests, more blood work I would say is used for the methylation test. I mean, they all contribute to the picture, but yeah, if you have those test results, then I would say the best thing you can do is book a consultation. Then, it's pretty cheap relative to all the testing you probably paid for already, relative to other experts out there. I mean, a consultation starts from £50 or £60. And we can go through those test results and try and understand if it is something else that could save you years and hundreds or thousands of pounds in terms of, well, not even that. That's not even the important thing. It could save you years of circling around an issue where it could have been right in front of your face. So um look, guys, it's a work in progress. This is new for us. That's not to say you're guinea pigs and test dummies, because everything we're doing is um it's live feedback. We see if something's working. If it's not, we tweak the protocol. There's nothing overly dangerous. It's all food based anyway, for the most part. If there's a clear supplement deficiency, maybe we'll look into supplements. But safety is always number one. So when I say it's a work in progress, we're always learning. We're always trying to see where we can improve results. That's not to say we're not getting any results now, it's to improve things. So let me just clarify that. Um, so yeah, look, guys, I feel like I've wrapped up about 4 times already, so I'm actually going to leave now. Um, Not treating the symptoms, but figure out the issue and seek to fix. Yeah, I mean that's the point, Michael. So good. All right. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope this was informative for you. I hope you've taken something away from today. I suppose this is more of a precursor of what's to come than I guess obviously we've launched a juvenile kit, but the work we're looking to do in this space and the invitation to be part of that work, particularly if you are an autistic parent, if you are someone who's dealing with ADHD and autism, the best way for us to be able to attack this issue and be able to help as many people as possible across the world is to get live feedback to understand, are the herbs working for you, are they not working for you, what's your experience, how's your kind of ADHD or your autism developed over the years, has it worsened, can we help you to fix it, most importantly. So get in touch, get involved. This is probably going to be one of the focal points for 2026. So yeah, thank you guys, and we'll speak on